Me? All right, cool. So I research deserves the best support we can offer, and I really think that teams like ours broadly that combine people with both domain science expertise and computer technical expertise are one of the most powerful ways that we can drive science today with skills like that. I don't even think it's especially close. I've never led a bioinformatics core. I've never even properly worked in one. I'm fascinated that meetings like this exist and that there's training for stuff like this. This is amazing. I've worked in the broader supporting research with computing data ecosystem for a long time. And over those couple decades, yeah, I've worked with and helped a number of other teams over the years. I'd like to talk to you today about some of the patterns I've seen, common issues, and where I've seen successes. And I'd like to learn from you the particular challenges and successes that come in bioinformatics cores, because I think there's a lot in common. I think bioinformatics cores are significantly ahead in some ways, and I think can learn from others in others. And I think meetings like this are really important because we have a hard, weird job leading teams like this, right? We have a very strange bundle of challenges. Each team has slightly different challenges, but they're all sort of drawn from the same distribution, right? They're challenges that normally you wouldn't see in one team. We have combined challenges of consultancies, startups, academia, nonprofits, government. And that's okay. We can learn from those other groups, pick and choose lessons. But I think we can also learn a lot from each other. And I think our groups in particular, we have a huge advantage. So we are in the world of science. That gives us a certain high level goal. It's a very fuzzy, nebulous goal, but it's still enough of a beacon to steer by. The goal is to advance science as far as we can, given the finite resources we have available to us. And in service of that, I think we have an advantage. We are people of science, whether we were trained as science or whether we've just sort of picked up a scientific mindset by immersion. These skills, this bundle of skills, gives us superpowers as managers, as teams, if we choose to use them. I'm not being facetious here. The kinds of skills that come with a scientific mindset, scanning the literature to see what other practitioners are doing, formulating hypotheses and testing them with experiments, synthesizing data. These are growth mindset. These are skills that other organizations pay real money to train their staff in, and we just have them, right? They're thick on the ground where we are. The strongest teams I've seen have learned to apply that scientific mindset, not just on the sciencey stuff they're doing, but the bigger picture, how they work as managers, how they work as teams, not just the stuff they work on, the manner of their work, not just the subject. So that's good because, again, leading these teams is kind of hard and weird. They're quite independent, these teams, compared to like a sponsored research funding finance office. And that means there's 4 different balls we have to keep in the air at all times. And they're very different. They require different approaches. The most common way I've seen teams fail at this juggling act is basically to forfeit, to not do it, to focus solely on the day-to-day work. I see this as a common sort of failure mode of new managers or especially of managers that sort of grew a team around them. They started as the individual contributor. They became a team lead of 2 or 3 people, and the team grew, but they never got the opportunity to grow out of this very, very narrow view of what they had to do. So it's perfectly understandable, makes perfect sense. But teams led by leadership that are super focused only on the day-to-day work are constantly being buffeted around, right? Because stuff is happening all the time. And if a manager hadn't even thought that this stuff could happen, much less was watching out for the signs of it, much less was building backup plans, they're just going to get thrashed around. Maybe even more frustratingly, if good things come up, they can't take advantage of them. Again, they didn't see it coming. Or stuff can happen that could be good and should be taken advantage of, or could be a distraction, and there's not even a framework for distinguishing between the two. So it's super important to keep an eye on all these balls. But again, I claim we have advantages here. So people, we work in scientific collaborations. Scientific collaborations are hard. That is some advanced peopling skill over there. But typically nobody teaches managers of our teams the basics when they're starting up. So really interested to hear about this training available. Processes, protocols for all the things. So again, I see research, computing, and data teams that have immaculate protocols in place for all their sort of subject matter work, but not the work around the work, how work gets done in the team, how people stuff. Product. We have a lot of expertise bundling work product into nice digestible chunks, like blog posts or papers or talks, and doing experiments and gathering data, and potentialities, choosing between an array of futures. I think we all know PIs, senior Chinese, who have a very clear research focus. They know that the way to have the biggest impact is they're going to work on X. They are going to be known as the go-to group for X. And we admire and expect that in researchers, but when we're supporting research, having that kind of focus feels uncomfortable. Well, we're in this job to help, and making decisions about our focus means saying, actually, no, sorry, that's not something we do. And that feels very uncomfortable, even though it's the way to have the biggest impact. So let's go into these in some detail. So people. Google, early 2000s, they decided they didn't believe anything that fuddy-duddy said about managing human beings. They were going to invent management themselves. So they studied all their global teams, all of them, looked at high-performing teams, looked at the managers of those, and they ended up discovering a bunch of stuff that was already known. But I like how they present it. They found that managers of great teams, they distinguished themselves by having certain advanced skills. And managers of poor teams distinguish themselves by lacking certain basics. And again, I claim that these advanced skills, we got that. Scientific collaborations, especially with trainees, they have taught us many or most of those advanced skills, but nobody goes about teaching, certainly not in academia, people the basics. But that's okay, right? The thing about basics is they're basic, they're easy to learn. There are incredibly well understood, time-tested people management practices that hugely help. Weekly one-on-ones with team members, periodic one-on-ones with peers and stakeholders, frequent specific feedback, judiciously and increasingly and in a customized way delegating responsibility. Nothing in this talk is rocket surgery, right? But this directly addresses these challenges. And that means that, with these shortcomings addressed, teams can take full advantage of their advanced people skills. All right, processes. Again, research, computing, and data teams, their technical subject matter stuff, often immaculate. But everything around that kind of gets YOLO'd a little bit, right? Not always, but a lot of the teams that have trouble executing, it's the case. And I'm not talking about inventing processes for processes' sake. I'm talking about processes that actually already exist, but only implicitly rattling around in one or two people's brains, especially the managers. A common symptom of this is Yeah, I don't know. Bob usually does that, and he's not in today, so I guess we'll have to wait. These things are much more valuable when they're written down. When they're written down, they can be double-checked, they can be improved, they can be experimentally iterated on. People can be onboarded to them, they can be handed off. So you don't have a single point of failure for stuff like this anymore. And bits can be automated. Really good teams start documenting processes early on. Third or fifth or seventh time something's getting done, gets down, so you can get feedback on it. Even when the processes are explicit, if it's not a process you get to do very often, a team can't get very good at it, right? I think a classic example of this is hiring, which is something we don't get a chance to do very often and is important. And so every time it happens, it's kind of this dumpster fire, right? So again, teams that execute really, really well have often invent good and meaningful ways to do the important things more often so they can get in practice. Products. I think bioinformatics cores are vastly further ahead here than other research computing and data teams. I want to talk about how I see them in the broader RCD landscape, but I don't think I necessarily have much to teach this audience. But we are in the expertise business. We're all in the expertise business. Our whole thing is marshaling the expertise of our team members to the research needs and bundling them in some consumable way. And there's a spectrum of ways that you can engage in research, right? These map roughly to 3, maybe 4 kind of service catalog categories, how you might think about delivering this expertise. Products, turnkey cookie cutter stuff. Yes, we do this 120 times a week, just click there. Productized services, fixed scope, reproducible process, clear deliverable. Oh yes, our team's done this 12 times before. We have a whole process. Give us this, we'll meet 3 times, and at the end of a week, we'll give you that. And then these longer engagements. I don't know how to do that. There's a few groups who've done something similar in the literature, but it is an area we have strengths adjacent to. Let's sit down, go deep on it, and come up with a possible solution together. So these are all valuable ways of exposing expertise to researchers. Where I've seen teams struggle often is when they're lopsided, when they are living mostly on the edge, one edge or the other. Efficient procedural work, steady business, but lots of competition, kind of rote work. Cutting edge expertise, fun, challenging work, but it's sporadic and it's hard to really explain what you do to people who haven't already collaborated with you. So less stressed research computing and data teams that I've seen, they have a very clear service catalog of ways to engage all along the spectrum. That's important for a bunch of reasons. Just clarity of expectations with the researchers. These are APIs, right, between the researcher and the group. But for within the team, growth opportunities for individual staff. They can start off in the procedural stuff and grow in expertise and responsibility. And efficiency for the team, as new stuff gets learned from long engagements, can get shared internally, turned reproducible. And if there's more demand for this, it can march its way down the spectrum. And we care about efficiency, right? Because the more efficiently we can deliver results to researchers, the more science we can support. And so typically the way this is done, I don't think I need to go into this for this audience, is take sort of facts on the ground, really codify those like you would with a process into small, meaningful chunks, as small as chunks as possible. And there you go. So where it starts getting more challenging is what's next. We have a starting point now. What's next? There's 3 very common, very bad ways of seeing this question answered in research computing and data teams. these are all implicit. People would never say these aloud because they're clearly ridiculous, but they're obviously the internal mental model. What will we do? Well, we'll do what we've always done. We'll do whatever researchers ask for. We'll do what the other centers are doing. And yeah, this is not the way, right? So our teams are funny. When other teams start thinking about the future, they're often walked through an environmental scan. What's going out in the ecosystem? Our teams, technology changes, science changes, funding changes. We're very, very aware of that stuff. That far field stuff, very clear. Where a lot of teams start, in my experience, start struggling is the near field stuff, where this team fits in. Not a research software development group in general, but this research software development group. And the goal is to advance high priority science as much as possible. The method is advancing, matching research needs to applications of the team's expertise and finite time. And we have a finite amount of resources. That means we can't do everything. That means worthwhile things, valuable things, fun, interesting, challenging things will be left undone. One way or the other, they'll be left undone. There's very few zero-sum games in science, and where we spend our time is one. And we owe it to our scientific community to be working on the things that make the most difference. Any decision about the future is invariably a decision that between two or more roughly equally good things. That means it always means saying no to one or more perfectly good things. A lot of teams just freeze here and don't make it any further. When they do, I think the path forward is pretty clear, right? The hard part is that mental block. But when they start looking, what is standing in the way of the science for a population of clients? What are we really good at? What advantages do we bring? This is another sticking point for some teams, maybe not your teams. What other teams can we collaborate with and outsource to? I see some teams think of other teams as the competition. The competition is not other teams or even commercial providers. The competition is postdocs and grad students trying to do the work themselves and spending a long time to get a crummy result, right? The competition is worse and less science. This isn't a zero-sum game. The more science gets done, the more efficiently, the more grants get awarded, the more work there is to be done. When the teams do start adopting a focus, there's a very quick virtuous cycle. Team members start building skill much faster because it can go deep. It becomes vastly easier to communicate what a team does to researchers, institutions, funders, job candidates, collaborators. There's now a framework to make decisions about handling new opportunities and setbacks. And that framework informs decisions about products, processes, and people, which then creates new possible futures. So that's the juggling act. So, our job is to advance science as best we can. We can learn from and work with each other. I think a lot of research computing groups could learn a lot from bioinformatics cores. There's common failure modes, but there's existing practices that can help. It's still a really hard job, but it is. I've seen research computing and data teams turn from sort of takers of orders to becoming important scientific partners for their communities or for their institutions, whatever their service area is. So I know it's a job we can do, and we have the skills we can apply. So in my slides, I have some resources on some of these categories I've seen problems in, if they're of interest. And I have also just becoming a manager, and I have all the slides and resources are available here. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jonathan, for that amazing keynote. think we might have time for one or two questions before we go to the Bioinformatics Core Management panel. So I invite people at Madison to ask their questions. And Jonathan, and actually, Madeline, who you're there, or someone, because we can't hear the audience, if you could please repeat the question for everyone else online to hear it, that would be amazing. And I'll monitor here the online chat in case there are questions from the audience as well. So yeah, thanks again, Jonathan, and Madeline, if there's anyone from the audience asking questions, that'd be amazing to hear.
Okay, nobody yet. Anyone have any questions? Oh, we got one. I'll just repeat it once you say it.
Yeah, very cool. Thank you. Where does having fun come in?
Okay, he said, great talk, thank you. And where does having fun come in?
Oh, my friend, if you signed up to be a manager, that ship has sailed. No, the fun is what is watching the science get done. The fun is developing team members so they can, grow as computational biologists or software developers or data scientists or data engineers. There's a ton of fun to be had, but unfortunately, we are doomed. If we're leading these teams, we're doomed to walk the earth enjoying the work vicariously and indirectly through this growth that we develop.
Okay. There's also a question. Okay, I don't know. Rodrigo, do you want to say the question in the chat, or should I?
Sure. I can read the question in the chat. So how do you decide what types of repeated work should be turned into a product or productized services? And what's the difference between them?
Yeah, so the productized service has a service component. It is like a product can potentially be a product is something that can be completely automated in principle, even if you don't do it. It doesn't actually require the expertise is embedded already in the process. The productized service requires a little bit more personal, it requires more people time, basically, right? It requires a little bit of collaboration, but there's pretty much a fixed process. I'm going to do A, B, C, D. If this, then E, else F. Done. These are useful categories, but like everything, they get a little fuzzy at the boundary. But it's still a useful framework to think about categorizing these sorts of things. And how do you choose which? I think so. Again, experimentation. But if you start seeing repetition, right? If you start seeing repetition for longer term engagements in some area, that's a hint that maybe there's something that can be pulled out and factored into some relatively reproducible process. People can go through it quicker, and then maybe it can be etched down, but it's just going to depend on the work.
Thank you, Jonathan. I see there's a request in the chat. Could we please get the link to the slides again? So we'll share that shortly. And Jonathan, if you wouldn't mind pasting that, I think that'll be very helpful. I think there's one last question here in the Q&A online. Do you have special considerations for managing students who may only be on a team for 4 to 8 months?
Sorry, yes. So students are fantastic resources for so students are a fantastic resource for practicing hiring skills, for developing their careers, for having a hiring pipeline, and for their work getting done. I think, like anything, the main key is to have super tightly focused, well-scoped projects for them to come in with. For 8 months, maybe you can get a little fuzzier, but something that can hit the ground running really quickly. I actually, let me tell a story about myself, a story on myself. My 2 jobs ago, we had hired co-op students, Waterloo co-op students, 4-month period. We'd hired them 11 times in a row, 11 times in a row. And it was a process rattling around in my head. Was not written down anywhere. And then something changed. Something changed in my, we actually wrote a better job description. So we got better candidates, which made shortlisting them harder. And everything went completely pear-shaped because I hadn't written down the process and people couldn't help. So actually in the newsletter, I learned from this mistake, and I have a checklist now of the whole process from hiring to offboarding that I can share. It'll need extensive changes depending on the kind of work you do, but I think they can be extremely valuable, but there's just this added responsibility. Your job is to get some work out of them, but also to grow them and give them a development path. I mean, that's true for all staff, but it's, for incoming undergrad students, it's even more balanced that way.